My name is André de Wit. I'm from Leadership Academy Amsterdam. And I'd like to introduce you to two more panelists. Tamra, can you tell a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I'm Tamra Chandler. I'm the CEO and founder of a company called People Firm. We're headquartered out of Seattle, and we work with companies globally to drive the win-win, inspired performance, driven by inspired people.
Great. Graham.
Yeah, so I'm the founder of Evolute 6, and everything we do is about reinventing organizations, looking at 3 arenas. How do you turn conflict into gold dust in each arena? The people side, how people interact with each other and themselves. Organization design, things like holacracy, sociocracy. And the legal structures. What alternatives are there to a limited company form that is better suited to a knowledge-based company?
Okay. Before we start, I'm going to ask a few questions to the panelists. I first want to ask you a question. What is the meaning of your current job for you personally? So what is the meaning of your current job for you personally? So go ahead, take a few seconds to discuss with your neighbor and find one if you don't have one. So, Tamra, why is talking about meaning important?
Well, I think if you want to create an organization of inspired people, which I talked about earlier, that has to start with meaning, and people have to see how they show up in the purpose of the organization, the mission of the organization, whatever the taxonomy is you want to use. I think that's one of the most important things, is how their heart connects to the work of the organization.
The heart connects to the heart of the company.
Right.
Right, that's very... Graham, it's very hard to top up to this, but try it.
I'll do my best. And I can only agree with what you've been saying, Tamra. And the bit I'd add to that is, if we make meaning of an organization as something that is dead, something that is maybe a highly complex dynamic system, but it's just a machine. Well, you can't connect your heart with a machine. You need to look at the organization, make meaning of what an organization is, as something that is beyond a living system, but is actually a living being that has its own meaning itself, that it has its own purpose that evolves as the environmental niche, the business context it fits in, changes. And then you start to look at the organization as something that itself has a heart and a meaning. And then you can really connect with it.
So it goes from heart to heart. That is what I hear you saying. But okay, you know, you're HR people, you feel that. I'm coming from operations, come on. It's about bonus, right? It's about the company car. It's about salary, it's about status. Could that also work? See a lot of doubted faces. Could that work? What do you think? Could that work? You have this sales guy, like me, says, you know, it's about the money, it's about the company car, it's about the status. Do you hire me? Those people think that it could work. But how can we reach it? What should they do? What they're maybe not doing today? Tamra, go ahead. I don't know, so that's why I need you.
How do we connect people to that purpose? Is that the question?
Yeah, but how could HR take care that they get those heart-to-heart connected people in the company and stay them in the company? And what should they do with the ones who are not connected?
Yeah, I think first off we have to be careful to be sure we don't think that's HR's job. I think that's the leader's job. And I think HR's job is helping coach the leaders to make that happen. So I think the first thing is, when you think about what is that connection that you want, being sure that you have a set of leaders who are aligned and connected to that themselves, that they can translate that into words that work for their people, that if people have a conversation with 5 different leaders, that there's consistency in that message and that connection. And we see a lot of times where organizations think they're there, but if you really start testing across those leaders, you'll find that they are not aligned and there's inconsistency, and that breaks the trust within the organization. So I think one of the first things to do is be clear on what it is, what is that purpose, be clear on the language and how you're connecting your leaders to it, and then ready your leaders to help bring the people to it. That's where I would start.
Great. Graham.
I'll pick up on what you were saying about somebody who's going to work to have a bigger car, a better title, etc. I spent 5 years in China in the early 2000s, and one of the biggest challenges in terms of retaining the most talented staff was that it was such a rapidly growing competitive market that somebody could get a better title and a better salary and would change company to get that. That is what their work meant for them. So in terms of working with meaning, what does your work mean for you? I'd add to this that this is something that is deeply, uniquely personal to each individual. And if somebody's meaning-making is anchored in my job title, the size of my car, what they're actually saying is that I derive my self-worth, my value as a human being in society from the respect that other people give me because they admire what I have. Mm-hmm. So we need to work with that. The challenge is, it's so easy for us to position this as an either-or. Either we are if I put it into extreme poles, a highly hippie-like community of people who just hang out together and have wonderful heart-to-heart conversations and deliver no results, or we are a bunch of dog-eat-dog, wolf from Wall Street people who are purely focused on results and getting the most we can out of the other person. Whenever we position things as opposites that can't come together, we're on a losing ticket. So for me, part of what we need to do to make this work is recognize that those are not opposites. They work together. They actually reinforce each other. And all you need to do is embrace all of the meanings, and for leadership to construct organization designs, ways of coaching each other, ways of structuring the company that make it possible for opposites to work together and support each other, rather than to just into conflict and fight.
But what I hear here is that there's also a cultural element to meaning. Could you explore that a little bit? You gave us an example, China.
Yes.
It's dangerous, of course, because partly prejudgmental, but...
Well, the culture's a huge thing. One of the, I'll call it a metaphor that I use. It's a simple equation that links the central task of any leader, which is to deliver results. If a leader is not delivering results, they shouldn't be in that job. Unless, for some other reason, they can't, then maybe they should be in the job and they need some support. What is it that the leader has as levers to deliver better results? And the metaphorical equation that I work from is results equals actions multiplied by relationships squared, and all of that to the power of context. In other words, if you make a small change in the culture, in the work context, you make a huge change in the results, because that's your biggest lever. Your second biggest lever is the relationship between people. A small change in that is a big multiplier on the actions of each individual person. And your smallest lever is actually to try and directly change the actions of each person through behavioral change, training, etc. So for me, the place that leaders ought to be putting most of their effort is on the culture, the context that everybody is embedded in. Because if that doesn't embrace conflict, for example, if culture says conflict is to be avoided or suppressed or manage conflict, well, how can you get at the gold dust of information that the conflict is telling you about a mismatch between my way of making meaning and what actually is?
Yeah. So let's build a little bit on you. You have to make your leaders aware, and you might even have to ask them to share their meaning. How do you see that? What have you seen examples of that?
Of where you bring the leaders to an alignment?
No, I have. For example, I worked in a company where we decided that that purposeful working, meaningful working was important, and we organized workshops where we've done that for 80,000 people. 2-day workshop where they could share their meaning, values, and a whole program around it to attach people to the heart of the company. And there we asked the top leaders to stand up in front of the audience and tell their personal meaning. Would you think that that's a good thing, or were we just a bunch of hippies?
Yeah, I don't think you're a bunch of hippies. I do think that programs like that can be very successful, but I think what frequently goes wrong if you're trying to shift or evolve your culture is that we try to do it with a big event. And that's great if that is something that's integrated into something more holistic, but if it's a one-time event, it becomes just that, just like the values written on the wall or whatever it is. I think what is curious and lovely and fascinating about culture is it happens every day, every moment, in everything that happens within the organization, the way we run meetings, the who we empower, the rewards we choose, the language we talk about, the way we build our talent processes and systems, all those things reinforce the culture. So I think first and foremost is getting clear on that. What is the culture? What is the experience that we want? What is our promise to our employee base? And how does that connect with strategy? I would say, to me, strategy and culture are the yin and the yang. I think you have to have clarity in both and really understand how they're working together to create the environment for your strategy to thrive. And then, once you have that clarity, I think you have to evaluate all those moments of truth that touch your employees. So if you say, we want to be a paperless environment and we're going to be agile, but yet your processes take weeks or months, or I can't get my computer fixed without filling out 5 forms, or whatever it is, if that doesn't reinforce what you're saying, again, you start to break the trust and you're not going to move it forward. So I think when we look at changing the culture, trying to drive something that is more meaningful, evolving it for our people, we have to be willing to look at the whole and then pick which of the levers, to your point, are the biggest levers we can pull that is going to send a signal. And sometimes we're just trying to tilt it a little bit, so maybe we can just do that. And sometimes we're trying to make a significant swing. And if you're trying to make a significant swing, I always tell leaders, you have to send a flare up. You have to do something that's going to catch people's attention and say, we're changing, we're making a shift. And those are often courageous moves that leaders have to think of, which might be your workshop. That might be what triggers it, but it needs to be part of something bigger.
It worked at least to the sense of belonging.
Yeah,
From that
for
perspective,
sure.
it works.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, because we still have 2.5 minutes. Do you have questions? Anybody who has a specific question? No? Does this meet your expectation? If you say no, I cannot correct it anymore.
Never ask a question if you can't process the answer effectively.
No, but I think it's very interesting, because if you go from engagement to meaning, it's basically going a level deeper and a level higher, connecting heart to heart. And in my former presentation, I also said that for the future, in the network age, it's much more about the engagement comes from linking to the meaning and the purpose of the company. And
Science
I think
was with you on that.
yeah.
Yeah.
So and I really think what you say is very good, because if the leaders don't know their own meaning of their job, then it's hard to expect that in lower levels they know.
Right.
So only the simple task for a leader to share his or her meaning of his or her job with his team is already very powerful. Yeah, there's a question.
Sorry, but it just comes to my mind when you say that creating purpose and meaning for the work is very important. So in many articles and studies, it said that it becomes even more important for the younger generation, for millennials, digital natives, and so on. Would you agree on that, or where do you see the differences of what meaning means? So a more demographic, maybe, question.
Yeah.
It's one of these yes and no answers. For all generations, the meaning of work has been vital. The thing is that up until recently, it was enough for work to have the meaning of it gives me the money I need to have a family, living safely and comfortably, and I can do what I want on the weekend. That was sufficient. Far more people today are saying, if my work doesn't fulfill a higher meaning in Maslow's hierarchy, if it's not around self-actualization, I'm not interested. There's a friend of mine who was sponsored to go on an MBA program from her company. She said, nah, I don't want that. And she went off and created her own startup, which was connected with her own meaning, rather than the multinational's meaning.
I think it's interesting when you look at the generational differences, they really aren't so different because of the age group, but because of the era that they are experiencing, right? So the millennials are the first digitally literate group of people, and that influences some of the way they engage. But if you actually look under the covers of what people want, I think generally they want the same things. And I think there's more, if you look at some of the better research, it really shows that there's a far less differentiation across those generations than we like to think. And particularly, I think it's interesting if you look at the millennials and you look at the boomers, and my dad's still a 73-year-old CEO, and my daughter's a 23-year-old brand new employee. And it's interesting how in some ways they're in the same space of what they're looking for right now in their lives, but they're completely different ends. And I think we see that with a lot of boomers doing, new careers and experiencing new things, starting new companies, doing all sorts of things because they're looking for some of those same things that the millennials are looking for.
Very quickly, last question.
Do you have time for my question?
Basically not, but ask it anyway.
Okay. Perhaps I'll ask you for sort of a one-word encapsulation. So if we think about leadership and the shift in work to being in different types of models, more holacracy, more teams that come together, teams that uncluster, unbossing of the organization, as Stephen from Novartis said yesterday. What is the purpose of leadership in that non-hierarchical approach, and who creates the meaning in that context?
2 words only.
2 words. That it's non-hierarchical is a myth. It's a hierarchy of meaning and purpose rather than a hierarchy of ego. And the job of the leader is to make that hierarchy of meaning and purpose clear, which could be anybody in the organization.
With this, something to think about.
Thank you.
With this, I want to close it off. So thank you all for being present. Thank you for your participation.